Every moment that passes feels like another piece falling into place around Devon Achane, as if he keeps surprising a team that should already know exactly what he is capable of. And yet, here he is, reshaping the mood of an entire locker room without forcing anything, without raising his voice, without asking for permission. He just keeps running, keeps insisting that there is more here than the standings claim, and somehow the message carries further than any speech could. It is strange how someone so quiet in his approach can ignite a spark that the Dolphins have been needing for longer than anyone likes to admit. There is this growing idea that he is no longer simply the fast kid who turns a crease into a burst of hope. He is becoming something else, something heavier, something that cannot be measured by yards alone. And while everyone talks about his speed, it is the weight of his words that keeps circling back. Words that came out almost casually when he sat across from Taron Armstead on that show where players tend to speak freely, through laughter or frustration. Words fans had been repeating among themselves, unsure if they were being delusional or simply refusing to give up. Out of 7 of those losses, 2 of those games we actually got beat. The others? Mistakes. Ours. Not a script. Not a defensive reaction. Just truth, delivered in a tone that made it impossible to escape. And the moment he said it, you could almost hear something unlocking. Because if those words came from anyone else, maybe they would sound like excuses. But coming from him, they sounded like a challenge. A push. A reminder that this team has been the architect of its own frustration far too many times. How often does a young running back step into a role that usually belongs to a quarterback? How often does someone who is supposed to wait his turn end up guiding the emotional direction of a roster that has been stumbling over its own potential? Tua should be the one projecting this energy, and maybe one day he will. But Achane is filling a void that desperately needed a voice, even if he never intended to. What makes it even more compelling is that he is doing all this while becoming one of the best at his position in the entire league. The numbers don't lie, though they still fail to capture the whole picture. He is approaching levels that people reserve for Christian McCaffrey, a comparison that used to feel exaggerated but is becoming difficult to argue against. With the ball, Achane is dangerous. Without it, he refuses to disappear. His energy does not fade when the play moves away from him. His presence lingers. He keeps demanding attention even when the stat sheet stays quiet. And if the Dolphins are going to reclaim the season, they keep letting slip through their fingers. They need exactly that kind of presence. Someone who reminds them that the difference between winning and losing is often the difference between discipline and distraction. They have beaten themselves more than opponents have beaten them. How many times has that pattern repeated? How many times has a promising drive ended with a mistake so preventable that fans just stare at the screen, unable to understand how the same issues keep resurfacing? If this mindset spreads through the locker room, if players embrace the idea that their record is more a reflection of self-inflicted damage than actual inferiority, the season shifts. And maybe that is what Achane intended all along. Or maybe he didn't intend anything. Maybe it simply came out because he was tired of pretending the team was powerless to change its story. At the trade deadline, teams tried to see if Miami would be tempted. The calls came in, whispers that bigger offers might follow, hints that someone out there knew exactly how special he is becoming. The Dolphins listened, but only out of courtesy, because the real truth is that they were never going to move him. The price was too high, and even then, no team seemed willing to give up what Miami would need for the conversation to be serious. Perhaps those teams are now wondering if they hesitated too long. Achane is making them rethink every decision they made in silence behind closed doors. He is sitting at 900 rushing yards, and the season still has time for him to push past 1,000 with space to keep going. 1,500 is not impossible. Not with the way he moves. Not with the way defenses are struggling to wrap him up before he slips through. He has already gone over 100 yards 3 times, all while running behind a defensive line that has been bruised more often than it has been whole. And just recently, 2 straight games with more than 120 yards. How does someone keep producing like that when the blocking is inconsistent? How does he keep creating chances that shouldn't exist? Maybe that is the exact reason he stands out, because he makes the flaws around him fade just enough to keep plays alive that should have been stopped early. Because he never looks rushed even when defenders are closing in. Because he carries himself like someone who sees the field differently from everyone else. And now Mike McDaniel seems to be adjusting how he uses him. Not because Achane can't handle the workload, but because the team understands that preserving him is essential. There's no point in pushing him beyond the limit when rookies Ollie Gordon and Jalen Wright can take scattered snaps, giving Achane space to remain explosive rather than exhausted. He is still the primary force, the heartbeat. The player defenses cannot figure out how to contain. Even the most disciplined units struggle to match his rhythm. He sits third in rushing yards behind Jonathan Taylor and James Cook, fifth in total yards from scrimmage. If there's anything he hasn't fully unlocked, it is his touchdown count. Only 9 total so far, a number that looks small compared to how impactful he has been. But touchdowns come in waves, and once those start stacking, the season could tilt in a direction that Miami hasn't felt in years. And this entire conversation brings up something much larger. What does it mean when a young player starts shaping the personality of a team? What does it say when the stability, confidence, and urgency begin radiating from someone who is supposed to be learning rather than leading? It raises a question that no one wants to say too loudly. Has this locker room been waiting for someone exactly like him? Someone who doesn't speak to impress, but speaks because he cannot pretend anymore? The Dolphins have been missing that raw honesty, that willingness to admit that losses aren't always about the opponent outsmarting them. Sometimes it is about miscommunication, hesitation, or failing to execute basic assignments. Achane acknowledges it without bitterness, without pointing fingers, without acting like he is above the team. That balance is rare. Players usually go to extremes, either silence or blame. Achane chooses something else. He chooses ownership. And it is impossible not to wonder how this shapes 2026. Because if this attitude tightens the focus now, even with the season pushing forward, the impact spills into everything that comes next. Training camp, preseason, every moment where details matter more than emotions. It is almost strange to think about how quickly things can shift. One player, one mindset, one moment when truth hits harder than statistics. Fans needed someone to say what they were already thinking. And he did. Not dramatically, not loudly, just honestly. And honesty sometimes hurts, but also frees a team from excuses that no longer fit. So where does this go next? Does the team embrace this clarity? Does the quarterback absorb this challenge? Does the head coach adjust the strategy with a new understanding of what the players believe they are capable of? Achane might not have intended to alter the trajectory of a struggling team, but he might have done it anyway. And sometimes leadership is exactly that, stepping into a void without trying to, simply because the moment demands someone to speak, someone to say the truth, someone to remind everyone that talent means nothing without commitment. The Dolphins are not as bad as their record. They know it. He knows it. Fans always suspected it. But knowing something and acting on it are completely different paths. If Achane's words become action, this season changes. If not, they remain what-ifs. But it feels different this time, as if the message has already started moving through the team, as if the players are looking at the losses and seeing them through a sharper lens. And if that continues, if the standard rises from within, maybe this is the moment the Dolphins stop beating themselves and start revealing what they should have been all along. Achane is young, but he is pushing this team towards something it has been missing for too long: accountability with purpose, initiative without arrogance, hunger without desperation. Maybe that is the true story unfolding right now. Not the yards, not the rankings, not the contract he is destined to earn, but the unexpected rise of a voice that refuses to let the Dolphins sink into excuses. And if that voice keeps growing, the entire direction of the franchise might shift with it.